We are hugely in information overload. There's just so much information. And one of the things that we find is our job is to sort through that information to make sure that what we're producing is accurate and what the engineer is looking for.
The end goal of all of our content is to help the engineer do their job better.
Welcome to the latest SemiConscious podcast. I'm today with Rich Nass, the Executive Vice President of Open Systems Media, which is the publisher of Embedded Computing Design, and also with Patrick Hopper, who's the publisher. So delighted to be with you, Rich and Patrick.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep, very good to be here.
Wonderful, great to have you, Rich. And if we can maybe start with you. So I don't want to be rude, but I think it might be possible to describe you as a veteran of the electronics journalist and reporting world, if you don't mind that description. So many people will be familiar with you from your reporting, but just for those who maybe aren't or don't know, your life story, I wonder if you can tell us, to start with, how you got into the electronics media world, and how you've got to where you are now as, running the editorial side on Embedded Computing Design.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, and no offense taken. I started out in engineering school. I graduated with a double-A degree, but I never actually practiced as an engineer. While I was in school, I got a job with electronic design as the new product editor, and this was back a while ago. We'll just leave it at that. It was a while ago.
Can we put it in a decade?
Sure. It was the late 1980s when I started.
Okay.
So I know I don't look that old.
You really don't.
But I was at electronic design for a long time, about a decade, and then I worked at a lot of the different media companies, always on the editorial side, always doing some aspect of the electronics industry and working with engineers all the way through. Didn't really have any training on the writing side, so I really look at myself as an engineer who writes rather than a writer who understands engineering. And I think that helps me connect to the audience better because I understand what they're trying to do. I feel very comfortable in an engineering lab, having the conversations with the readers, and I think I understand pretty well what they're trying to do. And believe me, over that time, what they're trying to do has really changed a lot. I'll date myself. I was the last class in engineering school who went through a completely analog program. Everybody who followed me had a digital path, and I had the analog path. So we took classes in digital as electives, but the standard program was completely analog. So
that does somewhat date you, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah. But I've learned a lot from the readers and along the way, and it's been a fantastic journey, and I really enjoy doing what I do. And what I find, I'll say, rewarding about what I do is that we're seeing technology as it happens. It isn't that we're locked in a room with other engineers working on stuff. We're seeing the results of their projects, and it's literally as it's happening. So we're covering the technology for tomorrow, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, and any regrets about sort of, not about that overall path, but about sort of not having yourself worked in a design engineering role at any point in your life?
No, not really. I consider myself somewhat of a people person, and I like to be out with the people and understanding what they're doing. I interact with so many different people across the globe, and that is a really satisfying part of it. If I was in an engineering lab all the time, I think I'd probably lose my mind.
And Rich, one thing too is that you grew up with the engineers who are now in management or product management. So you're having different discussions with a lot of those same engineers that you started with years ago. And now you're able to still have the discussions with engineers, but also with that management and get product roadmaps and have some more in-depth discussions.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. So most of the people who I came up through the ranks with are now in the C-suites and things like that. So we are having different discussions, but I almost always make it my business when I'm at a vendor site to go through the engineering lab.
Yeah. And when you were at university, maybe when you first started out in journalism, certainly the United States would have been seen as the epicenter of our industry. Is there, I mean, does it feel much more global to you maybe than it was 30 years ago?
Well, it has to, because unfortunately I started pre-internet, so it has to be more global. Silicon Valley was Silicon Valley when I started, and that was the epicenter at the time. And for all intents and purposes, it is the epicenter still. And I find I'm not based there, but I find myself there on a very regular basis. But yeah, it's absolutely global, and I find that most of the people we work with have teams around the world, and different parts of the world have different expertises. There's things that are going on in India that are different, that are taking place in Western Europe, and there's things that are taking place in Eastern Europe that are generally different from other parts of the world. So everybody sort of has their expertise. Some
Yeah.
people are good at software, some people are good at hardware, some people are good at manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you're based on the east coast of the States, as you say. You're regularly on the west coast, but are there ways in which you can effectively kind of track what's going on all around the world?
There are, but I'm still a huge believer in the face to face, which unfortunately puts me on planes more than I would care to do. But it is definitely a face to face business, and if you're not in front of the people and really reading what they're trying to do, it's harder to get a real feel for it. But you have to do what you have to do. The pandemic definitely changed how we do business, and it isn't just business, how we live. Our lives are different post pandemic, and just like we're doing this podcast virtually, we conduct lots and lots of business virtually. I find myself on Teams calls every single day, which is something that didn't happen pre-pandemic.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of that global reach, that's one way in which your journalistic practice has changed. That you're actually able, as you say, to talk face to people anywhere at any time.
Yep.
Yeah, that gives you real global reach, doesn't it?
Yep.
As a reporter,
Makes us work odd hours. A lot of the times we do a lot of work with the folks in Taiwan, and that either puts me on a call at 5 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night. But that's what we do. I'm sorry, Pat.
No, that's what I was going to say. Where I love booking your Taiwan times for you. So, uh,
got to keep him working.
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. All right. As you were describing, that's a long career, working across a variety of titles. I guess. I mean, you mentioned the internet a minute ago. When you started, it was pre-internet. That's changed everything. It's particularly changed the ways in which companies can make themselves transparent to customers and people who might be customers. I mean, companies today, we are doing a podcast. Companies, I'm thinking about electronics component manufacturers, software vendors. They make their own podcasts, they make their own videos, they publish their own news on their own websites. Information has set itself free, hasn't it? How do you reflect now as a journalist on the ways in which people's access to information has changed and the ways in which their requirement for information and insight has changed over 30 years?
Well, what you described is the situation where now we are hugely in information overload. There's just so much information. And one of the things that we find is our job is to sort through that information to make sure that what we're producing is accurate and what the engineer is looking for. We say all the time, don't believe everything that you read out there, because everything out there is not true. Artificial intelligence is a really good example of that. You ask AI the same question 5 times, you're likely to get 5 different answers. And who knows which one is the right one. So we do our due diligence to make sure we know which one is the right one. Not that we're using artificial intelligence to report it all, but we need to put out what is accurate. And it's harder than it used to be, but it is something that we're very proud of and we strive for.
And are there sort of particular kind of tools or techniques that you use there to fact check and verify information? Because I mean, you're party to the press releases and the article contributions and the statements and the opinions of hundreds and hundreds of companies who want to reach your readers and your audience. Yeah, particular ways that you do that.
That part of it hasn't changed a whole lot. You still have to do it the old-fashioned way, and you have to go out and you have to talk to people. You have to talk to people who understand what it is that you're trying to do and what it is that you're trying to say. You have to double check everything. There are no shortcuts that we found to making sure that we're doing is right and accurate. And that's one of the reasons people come to us, because we do take the time to do that. So they do trust us. And we talk about trust all the time. It's one of the things, it's the hardest thing to gain. It's the easiest thing to lose. So we really hold that near and dear to what we do.
And do you think that your audience kind of really understands that concept of trust and really sort of takes it to heart? I'm thinking about in the wider world. So if we kind of think outside our electronics industry and we think maybe to the world of politics and the way in which conspiracy and disinformation and misinformation is absolutely flooding the political discourse. And so one gets a sense that the audience really doesn't have a way to, people in general don't have a way to figure out what's a trusted source versus a source of complete nonsense. So we as humans are not necessarily brilliant at that. But in the professional environment, is it a little bit different from that when you're dealing with, highly educated, highly skilled, highly trained engineers? Is it different for you?
Yes and no. People still look at you with a little bit of a jaded eye, and until they get to know you, there's a hesitancy to believe what you're saying. We've been doing this for 40 years, so there's nothing new here. I personally have been doing it for 35 years. I wouldn't say that everybody knows me, but there's a fair amount of people who understand what it is that I'm doing, and they recognize my name, and they know that the things that we're producing are legit.
Absolutely, and I guess that applies personally to you as a trusted journalist, equally to your publication, to Embedded Computer Design, as an institution, as it were.
But we would certainly tell the audience that they shouldn't believe everything that we say, and they shouldn't just take it at face value. The things that you see, if you're not doing your own homework and fact checking yourself, you're not doing your own job right. Any engineer, I would think, would be looking at what we're producing and believing it enough to say, oh, okay, I'll take this into the lab and try it, but I do have to get my own numbers to make sure that this works as advertised.
Yeah, I mean, I think engineers as a professional class are highly skeptical, aren't they?
Yep.
And but professionally skeptical because that they need to deal in the world of facts and figures and quantified data rather than opinions.
Yep. Test. That's what we say all the time. And something that doesn't happen often enough, but you have to test. You have to test, and you have to test again.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, so let's talk a bit about the way that embedded computing design has evolved over the years. I mean, you, for instance, are a podcast host. That wasn't something for sure that you were doing when you started at electronic design, back in the day.
It was definitely not.
So you're finding new ways to engage with an audience. Is that driven by any particular part of the audience? I mean, are you having to adapt different kinds of ways of reaching your audience for different demographics, different age groups, whatever?
Yeah, the thing that's changed most is how the audience does its jobs, and that is completely the internet. Our job was, as a writer / engineer, was very easy before the internet. You went out, you did your research, you wrote your article, and you published it in the magazine. And now with the turnaround times used to be on a monthly basis. Now they're on an hourly basis, or even less than that in many cases. So we have to churn out a huge amount of content. But the thing that's really changed for us is that the engineer is less finding us and we're more finding them. So we have to go where they are. And there are people who like podcasts. There are people who don't. There are people who like print articles. There are people who don't. Some people like video. Some people don't. Some people like long-term articles. Some people like short blogs. So unfortunately, we have to produce them all. So we have to be where the engineer is going to be, and we do that. It isn't easy, but that's what we have to do to stay relevant. So we're producing videos and blogs and podcasts and long articles and short articles. A lot of it is contributed also by the community, and that helps us a lot. We love for engineers to write for us, to be podcast guests with us, to help us produce videos, to produce their own videos that we'll publish and promote. So it is somewhat of a community that we've established. It isn't just my team talking outwardly. It's a conversation that we have in both directions.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Tim, too, that, not only does the content come into the site, but the flow of that content once it's there out. So, we have close to 400,000 followers across all of our social networks on LinkedIn and X and Instagram and YouTube. So the content flows on the site first, and then it goes into the LinkedIn messaging, the Twitter, and all the other platforms. So that's an excellent opportunity to expand the messaging that's coming out that might only reside on a website or an email newsletter that comes out. It actually gets pushed globally once we push the button after the article is published.
Yeah. Did you just say 400,000?
Yes. Yeah. We have LinkedIn groups that are over 300,000 plus our other platforms. So with every 2, 3, 4 times a week, all of these groups are updated with the latest content from C programming to automotive to IoT to AI. All of those things are being pushed out globally.
Yeah, that's a big number, isn't it? Have you sort of got any idea of the extent to which that, if you like, you've saturated the audience, or is there still more kind of penetration for you to achieve?
Well, as manager of the groups, you notice that every day 25 to 50 to 100 people are registering for all these. So there's new people coming into all these platforms every single day. And, these are new opportunities to get messaging in front of them. And that's just LinkedIn. Obviously, as we do podcasts and videos, these platforms are expanding as well. So we're just pushing the envelope in as many different directions as we can to get our clients' messaging out. As Rich will say, the end goal of all of our content is to help the engineer do their job better. So if we're doing that,
why that's expanding is the role of the engineer has changed and made it much more horizontal. Back in the day when I started, you were an electrical engineer and you were working on whatever it is. Now, I don't think we produce electrical engineers anymore. We produce these people who are in these application spaces, and they're coming in from all different angles. You might be an automotive engineer if you're working on a healthcare application. You're certainly not designating yourself as an electrical engineer. If you're designing a piece of consumer electronics, you have some other job title. And then in the day, there were people who did software. Now the software is such a huge component. If you talk to almost any OEM, they'll tell you that the number of software people outnumbers the hardware people by a big number. And that's something that's really changed a lot, that it's a software world that we live in.
So, and if I can understand what you mean by that change to become a horizontal engineer. So by that you're meaning having a systems-wide sort of view of whatever it is that you're doing. So you're not just looking at sort of laying out a circuit on a board. You're looking at what's this application in its entirety, and what does that mean from a hardware, software point of view as an integrated whole.
Well, an example of that, we're embedded computing design, and we say we cover embedded, and people say, what is embedded? Embedded is pretty much everything that has a processor in it. So it's everything from a dishwasher to a microwave oven to a camera to a phone to an automobile to a train to a thermostat and everything in between. Those are all embedded systems. So the term embedded doesn't have the meaning that it did when embedded computer design first launched back in the day. And there's every one of those, just about every one of those systems has an operating system and it's running some sort of code on that MCU.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that's another way in which we've been talking about the ways in which your role as a journalist and as a publication embedded computing design has expanded. You're providing more forms of information, but actually the scope of the information that you're providing is also broader because there's just more. Electronics is more complex and there are more components to it.
It is very much more complex, and you look at some of these applications. Artificial intelligence is the perfect example. It is super complex, it's super hard, and we're just scratching the surface of what it is now and what it can do. And it's the role of the supplier to make that job as easy as possible for the engineer so they just don't get bogged down and never produce an end product.
Yeah, that must seem like a tremendous sort of education and information opportunity for you as a journalist to clarify and provide insight into what's going on there in AI.
Yeah, for sure. And like Pat said, our motto is we want to help the engineer do his job. So everything that we do is to help the engineer do his job. And I'll put in a little plug for ourselves. We've been running these classes at Embedded World that are called Build Your Own Embedded System, BYOES, where an engineer takes this class. It's usually sponsored by somebody who has a development board or an MCU on a development board. Everybody who takes that class receives a board and all the software that they need to get themselves started on their project. They port their own code onto that board, and it's either a half-day class or full-day class. By the end of that half-day or a full day, they have their application up and running on that board. So that's a great way to do training and to help people get past some of these hurdles that they might have thought were insurmountable before they started.
And to be clear, that's an event that you provide at Embedded World in Nuremberg in Germany?
Yeah, we started it at Embedded World in Nuremberg a couple of years ago. We did it at Embedded World North America this past year, and the classes have been highly successful. So we're doing them again at the upcoming Nuremberg, and we certainly anticipate doing them again in North America, which would be in November in Anaheim.
Very exciting. So, so Nuremberg in March this year, 2025. So, and someone who's interested in doing that, how do they need to apply to?
I'll defer to Pat on that one. How does somebody get into our Build Your Own Embedded Systems class, Pat?
Just reach out to us on Embedded Computing Design. We have a drop down and a microsite for Embedded World, so you can access all that information there. As well as all new products and news and everything coming out of Embedded World as well.
Okay. So, Patrick, a good opportunity to ask you, in terms of Embedded World, what other kind of opportunities are there for people to reach? You talked about your 400,000 large audience. How can people reach you in the context of Embedded World? We're talking in January 2025. Embedded World is a couple of months away. What kind of opportunities are there to reach an audience via embedded computer design? To Embedded World?
Thank you. So just like CES, no one just shows up at CES for the first time and walks through the show. They're doing their research before they get there. Are they interested in automotive or consumer electronics or pets or healthcare or iPhone cases, whatever it may be? People are doing their research before they get there. At Embedded World, it's the same thing. Those German engineers, or engineers typically in Europe, are doing their research prior to showing up in the door. And so what we're encouraging all of the exhibitors to do is participate with content, with Rich as an example. You can clearly contribute as a blog, be a participant of our Embedded Executive podcast, news items, press releases, all of those things are all aggregated on our news feed. So step number one, which is what we do for free all year round, is to get as much content as we can into the hands of design engineers, especially before this show. So when they show up, they know exactly where to go and what to do. From there, we have a couple cool things that we do, from our Best in Show awards to our Road to Embedded World blog series that we coordinate with Embedded World. Two new things that we have, as well as a scavenger hunt where you go around the show and visit 5 different booths and then come back to our booth and get a Raspberry Pi board. And then the final one this year that is new, which has been a huge success, is we have a dev kit zone where all the latest dev kits are there in one spot. We have the CTO from Raspberry Pi coming to talk and show off their board, TI, and several other vendors that are participating. It gives the engineers, what the engineers love is to touch and feel the latest dev kits. And this is a great way to encourage that. And then we actually get the engineers that had their hands on the development of the dev kits there to talk about it, raffle one off. So we're going to be doing a lot of giveaways of the latest dev kits, a lot of Raspberry Pis that we're giving away, a lot of things to get things into the hands of engineers.
Terrific. So vendors can sponsor that dev kit zone and get their dev kit sort of a part of that offer. Okay, very good. Excellent. So there we are. So opportunities in the embedded world, and I think Rich and Patrick, both of you have explained really nicely there the ways in which embedded computing design is providing different ways for a large audience to inform and educate themselves about what's going on in the electronics world, which is, has evolved, as we discussed, so much over the past 30 years. Thank you to you both for taking the time to talk to me today. Really enjoyed our conversation. And here we are. Urge people to go and explore embedded computing design and go and visit you in Embedded World in March 2025.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye now.